Caroline, thank you very, very much for coming. I think everyone is very happy to be here. My relationship with Caroline Glick goes way back. In fact, someone just asked me if we're related. So I said she was my sister, and you're my uncle. And before you knew it, we found out how close we were related to each other. We really are one big family, and it's important to feel it. I just wanted to mention about my own personal relationship with Caroline, and it goes way back. I ran the Jerusalem Fellowships of Asian Torah for 10 years, and part of the program was called the Hasbara Fellowships, where we would train and we would coach university students how to do campaigns successfully on campus, which I'm sure you're aware of what's going on in the American university world. A tremendous amount of anti-Semitism and peer pressure, in the opposite direction that we would like. So, as you became aware, that if I worked for Asian Torah, I also learned there for 10 years, so my total stay there was a little over 20 years. I became very close with Rav Weinberg, of blessed memory, and one of the things he was famous for saying was that the Jewish people are like a sleeping giant. So we're sleeping, and yet we're a giant. The sleeping part is we need to be awoken, and the giant part is reminiscent or a hint to the idea of how much potential, how much greatness that we really have. I want to introduce Caroline a little bit by talking about the Parsha. As we know, for those who don't know, those who are married know this, we were redeemed from Egypt in the merit of the righteous women. In this week's Parsha, we have two of these to help you give birth. But midwives, thank you. Puah and Shiphrah. And the Gemara mentions that Rav and Shmuel have an argument. One says that this couple of women, one was Yocheved and Elisheva, but the more famous answer is that it's Yocheved and Miriam. Now, just talking about the two names are very interesting. So, Shifra is from the word like Mishuperet, to straighten out the babies and make them look beautiful, as well as Shifra herself was, Yocheved herself was very beautiful. But Miriam, that's what I want to focus in on. Puah, that she cooed the baby, that she amused the baby through sounds. The word, how do we know it's Miriam, as opposed to Elisheva? So Miriam was a prophetess. She had some deep insights. She had a relationship with God. And as we know, the prophets are there to rebuke the people, to straighten them out, to get them on the right path. So what was going on? Amram and Yocheved, they weren't the only ones, but because he was the Gadol Hador, he was the leader of the generation, they stopped having relationships because, unfortunately, all the male babies were being killed by Pharaoh. So Miriam came up with this genius idea. What doesn't make any sense? Why should you not have babies? He's only killing the men. He's only killing the boy babies. You're destroying the Jewish nation by not having any. You're worse than Pharaoh. Can you imagine saying that to you? Takes a lot of chutzpah. You're worse than Pharaoh. So she convinced them. She was an activist. She convinced them to get back together because she knew through her nevuah that the savior of the Jewish people were going to come through them. Now, what it is about the word, Rashi mentions that the word puah is related to a speech. We know that Miriam, the Torah itself, calls her a Neviah. Okay? So that was the proof that she was Miriam, that Puah was Miriam, because Miriam was a prophetess, and the word Nun Bet Aleph, Neviah, is using speech, right? The prophet comes and declares things and makes things known to the people. So this is what I wanted to introduce Caroline a little bit. The idea that she, number one, she's a woman. She's an activist, and I think she's really brilliant. And I think everyone else here would agree. She's able to articulate what she sees. We all have, perhaps, because we are a nation of prophets, but we're not able to express it as eloquently. Some people can write and can't speak. Some people can speak but can't write. But I want you to know Caroline has mastered both. So without any further ado, I'll introduce her a little bit more as Chicago born. She's a senior fellow at the Middle East Affairs in Washington, D.C. Based Center for Security Policy, is Deputy Managing Director and the Senior Contributor to the Jerusalem Post. She received her BA in Political Science at Columbia University in New York. She received her Master's in Public Policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. A former officer in the Israel Defense Forces, she was a core member of Israel's negotiating team with Palestinians and later served as an assistant policy advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, the widely published Glick, Caroline, was an embedded journalist with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. She was awarded the Distinguished Civilian Service Award from the U.S. Secretary of the Army for her battlefield reporting. In its Israeli Independence Day supplement in 2003, Ma'ariv named her the most prominent woman in Israel. In December 2005, she was awarded the Ben Hecht Award for Middle East reporting from the Zionist Organization of America. In 2006, she was awarded the Abramovich Prize for Media Criticism by Israel Media Watch. And in May 2009, she received the Bar-Ilan University Guardian of Zion Award. She's the founder of Latma, and it's a satirical website, and they won the Israel Media Watch's People's Choice Award in 2011, and Tel Aviv University's Jewish Peoplehood Award in 2010. Caroline is featured as a speaker in several documentaries: Relentless, The Struggle for Peace in the Middle East, and Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West. She also authored Shackled Warrior, Israel and the Global Jihad, and the Israel Solution, the One-State Plan for Peace in the Middle East. I think it can go on and on and on, really. And we came here to listen to Caroline. So please, a warm welcome to Caroline.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Poston. It's good to be seeing you again after so long. I mean, you're one of these people who I keep running into at important moments, I think, for the Jews in the United States and in Israel. When we first started working together over a decade ago, it was really when the peace process, such as it was, collapsed, and we saw rising anti-Semitism throughout the diaspora, and really cropping up for the first time in the United States in 2000. And so here we are again at the cusp of a new era for the American Jewish community and for Israel, with the final completion of the Obama administration. How many more hours is it now? I think 50. Anyway, it was funny. The rabbi started with a fine Dvar Torah, and I was just thinking when I was driving here. I've never lived in Baka, but I used to when I had more time before my kids were born. I used to come here and have coffee once in a while, and I'm always struck by the fact that all of the names of the streets here are of the tribes, are of the sons of Yaakov, who we just read about in the past several weeks in the synagogue. And in a way, I don't know why, or maybe because I was supposed to speak about the American Jewish community, but when I was driving down the streets here, and Naphtali, Asher, Yisachar, Zvulun, looking at Shimon, and I suddenly, it sort of became a little bit wistful. Is this going to be the fate? God forbid, of the American Jewish community, you see the names, 10 lost tribes, part of our family, part of our people, and they've been gone. And even though it's been like 3,000 years almost, we still miss them. You know, we remember them. We name our children after them. We think about them. We wonder what happened to them. You know, it's strange to think that the American Jewish community right now is really at a very critical point in its history. How many of you, by the way, just so I understand who my audience is, how many of you live here in Israel? Everybody. Okay, good. So we're talking about our family in America. We're not talking about us in America. These are people you are people who live here, thankfully. Just to make sure that I know what pronoun to use. But anyway, the American Jewish community was always, since really it was established since the beginning of the United States, it was the strongest, most secure Jewish community in the world, in Jewish history. And they were a community that was never the target of official discrimination. The American Jewish community was given full citizenship from the moment the United States was established by George Washington himself. And this was something that was unprecedented in the exilic communities. And then throughout the years, they were always the strongest community. Throughout the next couple hundred years, you had a problem with a blood libel in Damascus. It was the American Jewish community that had to get involved and talk to the president and see what could be done with the British to try to save the Jews of Damascus, and so on and so forth. And now we're in a different situation. We're in a situation where the United States Jewish community is very much on the precipice of self-destruction. You see that among the two largest denominations of American Judaism, Reform and Conservative Judaism, you have intermarriage rates that are going on 90%, meaning that everybody essentially is marrying out. Everybody. 90% is everybody. That means you know that one guy who married the Jewish girl out of all your friends. And you see rising anti-Semitism in the left, you know, in the political home of the American Jewish community by and large. That's where you have the growth spurt of anti-Semitism. So you have an assimilated community that is opting out, and you have rising anti-Semitism rates in the community that is the natural home of those people who are opting out of Judaism, and this is really a very dangerous mix, right? Because it's saying, well, if your political home is becoming anti-Semitic, and it is, and if your religious home is meaningless, and increasingly it is, then you're not going to be able to fight anti-Semitism. You're not going to be able to defend yourself against people who want to do you, yeah, I hear it, who want to do you harm. You're not going to be able to defend your communal interests because as an assimilated Jew, you're not even quite clear what those interests are, what that community is, and you don't really feel any communal feeling towards people who you're not involved in on a daily basis because you're not raising your children Jewish, you're not marrying Jewish, you're not thinking about it. You know, as the Pew survey from, I think it was 2015, said that, you know, the plurality of Jews think that being Jewish means having a good sense of humor, like in Seinfeld. You know, this is a tragedy unfolding before our eyes, and it's a cataclysm. It's a cataclysm of on the level, I would say, of the disappearance of the 10 tribes. And it really is a question of whether or not they're going to change something that they're doing. I mean, the Pew survey, in a way, was a wake-up call for the American Jewish community. Do something else. Do something different from what you're doing. Because what you're doing trying to move towards the lowest common denominator, make everybody feel at home. Outreach to the non-Jewish spouses of Jews in your community, inter-religious dialogue with Muslim organizations. All of these things are not working, right? All of the things that you're doing to try to make everybody feel comfortable in your community are making people leave your community. They're not making people stay in your community. That's what the Pew survey showed, right? That the watering down of Judaism by the American Jewish community, by community after community, was not maintaining the community, was not preserving the community, it was destroying the community. So the Pew survey came and said, do something else, right? Look, we're giving you a mirror. Look at yourself in the mirror. See what's happening. This is not a positive situation. Do something different, because what you're doing is not working. And the American Jewish community saw the Pew survey, said, oy vavoy, and then it doubled down. And then it doubled down, and it didn't do anything different. And the major Jewish American organizations didn't do anything different. The Rabbinical Assembly didn't do anything different. The Reformed Jewish community didn't do anything different. They didn't change the curriculum of their rabbis. They didn't rethink their positions on social justice, on tikkun olam, on making alliances with far-left groups, with Muslim groups. Nothing that they were doing was changed one iota. To the contrary, they doubled down. What do I mean by doubled down? Well, we have somebody, for instance, who took over from Abe Foxman at the Anti-Defamation League named Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan Greenblatt joined the ADL a couple of years ago, straight from Valerie Jarrett's policy shop in the Obama White House, and before that, after a stint at the George Soros-run Aspen Institute in Colorado, with no background whatsoever in the Jewish community, no resume of communal involvement. And Jonathan Greenblatt took over the ADL from Abe Foxman, and very, very openly has been working to transform it into a Jewish voice for the Democratic Party, or more to the point, for the Obama administration, and now for whatever the former President Obama, soon-to-be former President Obama, is going to be wanting to do as he remains in Washington to fight every day for what he believes in. And we see it. We saw it in 100 rabbis just signed a letter saying that they support Keith Ellison to head the Democratic National Committee. This is 100 rabbis coming out, signing a letter, publishing it in the newspaper, saying, we support a Muslim Brotherhood financer, a Hamas supporter, a Louis Farrakhan former employee and longtime adherent. We support the election of an out-and-out Jew hater to be the head of our party. So when I say doubling down and becoming more radical, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. And all in all, and in the meantime, right, you have these Jewish advocacy organizations in the United States that are trying to support the students on campus, but they're not calling for federal action against anti-Semitic hate groups on campus like Students for Justice in Palestine. They're not demanding IRS audits of this organization that is a straw organization that was never registered anywhere and yet has chapters in 200 different campuses around the United States of America and is inspiring and inciting Jew hatred in every single one of them, many of them operating on the dime of the universities themselves that are financing their operations through the student governments. You never hear an outcry among the American Jewish Organization calling for them to be declared by the federal government a hate group, even though that's what they are, and to protect the rights of Jewish students under the Civil Rights Act. which they deserve. You have it, the Zionist Organization of America does it, and other little organizations do it. But the hue and cry of the American Jewish community has not come to defend the rights of American Jewish students on campuses in any serious way. Nobody's talking about taking serious action against the people who are harassing and terrorizing Jewish students on campus. And, one of the reasons for this, right, is part of the whole overall policy of denial. Now, where does this stem from? I started by saying that the American Jewish community, until very recently, was the strongest Jewish community, maybe ever. Maybe ever. And the thing that was so distinct about the American Jewish community, really from its inception, is that different from every other diaspora community, the American Jewish community never saw itself as a diaspora community. It always viewed America as its permanent home. It always viewed America as the Golden Medina, as the Promised Land. And their journey as Jews was going to end in the United States. It wasn't going to go any further than that. We saw it to a certain degree with German Jewry. We saw it to a certain degree with British Jewry, that same sort of embrace, wholehearted embrace of the state. But the difference between American Jewry on the one hand and German Jewry and British Jewry and other European Jewish or Jewish communities in Western and in Central Europe was that America truly never had governmental anti-Semitism. It never discriminated officially against Jews. And there was no 20-year draft of Jews the way that there was in Tsarist Russia. There was no restriction on Jewish registration in universities or in high schools. There was no requirement for communal-wide action the way that there was in Napoleonic France. But in the United States, there was. I mean, in the United States, in America, there was never any of that. There was anti-Semitism. All of our families could tell us stories about this or that, and they couldn't get into this or that, couldn't get this or that job because they were Jews. But that was different. That was on the local level, that was on the private level, those were clubs, those were universities, those were jobs by specific people who were doing it, but never the federal government. So it was different, and they were wealthy. Right? American Jews, by and large, by the second generation, were wealthy and self-confident. When Israel came around, in a way, they were very anti-Zionist initially, the American Jewish community. The American Jewish Committee only started being Zionist after the Six-Day War. The Reform movement was anti-Zionist. But, then they came around to Israel. They didn't come around to Israel to say, this is Reshit Tzmichat HaGeulah. They said, these are poor Jews, and we're rich Jews, and we're going to help them. We're going to be their uncles and aunts in America, and we're going to give them generously in order, out of fellow feeling for our Jewish brethren. Not because we feel that Israel is going to become the centerpiece of Jewish world. We are. But Israel is one big refugee camp, and we're going to see to it that everybody is taken care of. And so after 48, and with the big aliyah from the Arab world and the DP camps in Europe, you saw the beginning of an American Jewish tradition of charity for Israel. And there was a paternalism into it. There was a patronizing attitude towards it. But on the other hand, in a way, it was reasonable. It was in place. The American Jewish community was a stronger community than the state of Israel was a country. We were poor, they were rich, we needed their money, and they gave it willingly and generously. And then in 1967, we had this miraculous military victory. And suddenly, we became very interesting and attractive to the American government for the first time. Right? I mean, John F. Kennedy gave us anti-aircraft missiles starting in 1962, but before that we had no military relationship with the United States. Eisenhower was against Israel because he thought we were harming his chances of getting Nasser out of the Soviet fold. but nobody thought of us as a strategic asset until after the Six-Day War, and that was when the United States federal government, the Defense Department, the State Department started looking at us in a completely different way. And the American Jewish community took this proper step and said, okay, wait, so now the United States wants to build some sort of an alliance with Israel because Israel is important. It's this tiny country that defeated 3 Soviet-supported armies, plus with Soviet involvement in '67, in this unbelievable military victory when they had essentially nobody supporting them. We were under boycott from the French and the Germans at the time, and the Americans weren't serious suppliers. So it started becoming of interest to the United States from a national security perspective to support Israel, and the American Jews stepped in and started advocating on behalf of strengthening that relationship through organizations like AIPAC and others. But it was always this, Israel needs America, and we're here to help the Israeli Jews. And then over time, and then came the 1990s and the peace process. The peace process just changed everything for the American Jewish community in some ways, and in some ways just strengthened already problematic trends that were happening among the American Jewish community. Because what this peace process was translated to in the United States was we don't have to worry so much about Israel, we have to worry about peace. Right? That Israel now had become synonymous with the peace process, that we didn't have to keep supporting Israel at the centerpiece of what it means to be Zionist in the United States. We didn't have to worry about strengthening the Israel-America alliance. What we really had to do was work towards peace between Israel and the Arabs and support peace between Israel and the Palestinians and be advocates for the peace process, which meant also becoming advocates for the PLO in the United States and accepting that Israel had done things that were bad to the Palestinians. Now, all of this happened, I said it was exacerbating trends that had already taken place. So, in 1967, the United States started viewing Israel as a strategic asset. But at the same time, we started seeing the left, following the Soviet Union, turning very sharply against Israel. So that at the same time that it became most popular to be pro-Israel, it also began to be problematic on the fringes of the left to be pro-Israel. And so we saw Israel was becoming more and more important, but it was becoming more and more slowly, becoming more and more difficult for people on the left to be pro-Israel, because the more important Israel became, or was perceived as being to U.S. national security, the more the left in the United States was turning against Israel. First on the fringes, and now we see very much centrally. But this has been sort of a constant rise, slow but constant rise. It's peaked in 1973, then went sort of down, peaked again in 1982 after the Lebanon War, sort of tapered off, and then during the first Intifada it also went up again. And each time we saw that there was this push to try to temper Zionism with peace activism. The two, in the end, fused together in 1993 with the Oslo process, where we saw AIPAC beginning to act as a lobbying firm for the PLO on Capitol Hill, calling for senators and congressmen who didn't want to have anything to do with Arafat to start funding the PLO and supporting the training and the arming of Palestinian security forces. And you saw American Jews taking very prominent roles in the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. When you saw, American Jewish organizations bringing in Dennis Ross or Aaron Miller or Dan Kurtzer or Richard Haas to be their keynote speakers instead of Elie Wiesel or rabbis or whatever, then you saw that suddenly what they were upholding as these paragons of what it meant to be an American Jew were these American Jewish diplomats who were involved with pressuring Israel to make concessions to the PLO. Right? And so that changes your perspective on what it means to get to the height of the American Jewish community. Suddenly you're celebrating people who don't necessarily have Israel's best interests at heart, or don't necessarily view a strong Israel as the most important thing, the way that they had been in the 1980s and the 1970s. So this already began to change the way things were viewed. And then finally, you got to a point where, at the same time, simultaneously with this, you saw something else happening in the American Jewish community. As Israel became more and more synonymous with peace process, this Holocaust started eclipsing Israel as the most important non-religious aspect to Jewish identity. Right? You started seeing the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum was established. Holocaust memorial museums were established in almost every town in the United States. American Jewish educators were placing more and more emphasis on Holocaust education and less emphasis on Zionist education and Israel history in the American Jewish school system, in Hebrew schools and colleges and high schools and in Hebrew schools. And this too is problematic. It was unsustainable because the Holocaust was done to the Jews. The Jews didn't do the Holocaust. The Jews did Israel. We didn't do the Holocaust. We were victims in the Holocaust. We were with obvious exceptions and many, but I mean, we were objects. We didn't choose the Holocaust. That was something that was done to us. We were victims. And when you're basing a group identity on victimology as opposed to history, as opposed to a history, a 4,000-year history, beginning with Abraham, of doing, of making decisions, it's all connected, by the way, to the land of Israel, then why would somebody want to be this victim instead of that victim? Why is it more important to be a Jew who was victimized by the Holocaust than an American Indian who was, victimized by the westward expansion of the United States of America? What makes this victimhood more important or worthwhile than an Arab who's saying that they were victimized and continue to be victimized by Israel? When you're ignorant because you're not learning anything, you don't know your own history, you're told that Israel is synonymous with the Holocaust, and you're being told that the most important aspect of your Judaism is Holocaust. Why wouldn't you marry out? I mean, why would you marry in? Why bother? What does it matter? It's got no significance. It's not about you. And anyway, their victimhood is cooler than mine. And it becomes a fashion decision, not a tradition. And this is what's happened in the 1990s. And then all of a sudden, these people came to the universities in the 2000s, essentially ignoramuses. And they're beset by this massive rash of anti-Israel activism being propelled forward by tenured anti-Semites, by professional activists who are operating on their campuses. And a lot of ignorant people who are being told and spoon-fed these lies about Israel from the media, from wherever, and they're supposed to be on the front lines defending Israel. What do they know? Nothing. Nothing at all. This was sort of the mix that all of these kids came into. And then we wonder, well, what can be done in order to stop this? What can we do in order to reverse this trend? Or is it irreversible already? Well, first of all, I think that it's important to note that that these trends are a consequence of concerted decisions by leaders, right? Concerted decisions by leaders to de-emphasize Zionist education, to emphasize Holocaust education instead, to cater to the lowest common denominator of congregations and of communities instead of challenging people to rise to an occasion, of emphasizing, of failing to recognize the weakened position of the American Jewish community, and at the same time the rise and empowerment of Israel. And that's the last thing. So I said that the American Jewish community never needed any other community. They were always the strongest community in the world. They were always sui generis. There's never really an exilic community like the American Jewish community. And Israel, on the other hand, was weak. We were weak economically. We were troubled from a military perspective, of course we still are, and so on and so forth. But today, we still have a lot of problems, and we still have a lot of bugs in our system, or features in our system, that have to be reformed in a major way. But our economy is spinning along. We're able to provide excellent lives for our children. We're able to absorb Aliyah from wherever, and whether it's Jews, although they're having trouble finding good jobs here, but Jews from France, or Jews from Venezuela, or Jews from Ukraine, Jews from Russia, wherever they happen to be coming in from. They're able to, after a fashion, make very good lives for themselves and build homes for themselves and their children here. And we have the highest rate of Jewish literacy of any Jewish community ever in our history, including at the time of King David. We have excellent world-class universities. Our education, despite a lot of moaning and groaning, is great. We're turning out scientists and doctors and lawyers and artists and poets and writers and whatever we need. And we're making a go of it. This today is the largest Jewish community in the world and the strongest Jewish community in the world. And we're stronger both numerically and spiritually, educationally, religiously, than the American Jewish community is. And financially, we're doing pretty well. So the tables are turning. We need the American Jewish community less and less. And they're beginning to need us more than they ever have. In fact, they could argue that they hadn't needed us in the past, and now they need us desperately. Because, aside from, or in addition to, re-engaging Jewish education on a meaningful level for Jewish young people, and somehow or another figuring out a way to make it affordable for young families, which is, I don't see how you do that. But somebody could probably figure it out. Children have to be inspired to want to be Jews in the United States. I mean, they're such a small minority in such a large country. There's so many reasons not to be Jewish. That means that if you want to be Jewish, it's because you truly are inspired to remain Jewish and to care about your Judaism. And the chief source of that inspiration, aside or in addition to the Torah and the whole swath of Jewish history, is, of course, this country. It's, of course, this country. Of course. The center, the one thing that has to be reinvested in from the American Jewish community's perspective is Zionism. The one thing that has to be inculcated in the hearts and minds of the American Jewish children is not that, we love Israel when it makes peace, but, Israel's bad because it's not making peace, or, the settlements are bad and we support Israel except not the settlements. No. The Jewish people, in America in particular, have to understand that Zionism is a blunt instrument. You don't get to choose and pick which kind of Zionist you want to be. That if they don't understand that it is important to support Israel biblical Israel, modern Israel, on the map, in their mind, then they're going to lose their Jewish identity. If Jews want their grandchildren to be Jewish, Jews, in their 50s and 60s and 70s, then they have to make sure that their grandchildren are learning why Israel is inspiring and why they should be inspired by it. Because absent that, and in these Jewish communities that are becoming less and less religiously observant, that less and less interested in anything having to do with Judaism, they won't be Jews. And they will be the new lost tribe. And it will be a disaster. And we shouldn't wait for this to happen, and we shouldn't assume that it happens. I think that we, as Israelis, have a responsibility to Jews all over the world, including in the United States, to warn them, to exhort them, to be involved with them, and to help them. And you do have a leadership failure in the American Jewish community, because for generations now they have been catering to the lowest common denominator, and that common denominator keeps getting lower and lower and lower till it is devoid of meaning and certainly incapable of inspiring anybody to remain Jewish. So we don't want that to happen to them, because we care about them, because they're our brothers and sisters. That's why. And we don't want them to disappear. We want them to survive. So this is now, when they have to start acting. I mean, they needed to start acting, in 1985. But now it's 2017. 2 years after the Pew poll came out. They've done every single thing wrong since then. Maybe they'll keep doing everything wrong, but we don't have the freedom to turn our backs on them anyway. We still have the obligation to try to convince them to remain Jewish, to try to understand why this was a gift that was given to them from their families and from God, and to help them to survive. So, sorry to be such a downer, but I do think that, we're going to lose a lot of Jews, but we don't have to lose 70% of the American Jewish community. We can mitigate the loss, we can limit it, and we can ensure that the people who remain for generations to come. So thank you very much. Thank you. I can stay here for another 10-15 minutes if you want to take some questions. I saw you were listening avidly and going,
One thing you have to offer are solutions. I mean, you said we need to do these kinds of things, but do you have any ideas for what we, as opposed to the government, do?
Well, I think that there has to be engagement with synagogues in the United States. I think, it would be great if a synagogue like this, for instance, could partner with a synagogue in the United States and sort of take it under its wing and try to help it by giving it programming, by sending young people there to volunteer in the Hebrew school or whatever. These are kind of, this just off the top of my head, these are things that can be done by communities in Israel to help communities in the United States that are underserved, that you have a lot of people there, children who aren't going to Hebrew school, that aren't going anywhere. We just, Menachem Begin had Project Renewal, right, where these American cities were partnering with poor communities in Israel and dedicating specifically their contributions to Petach Tikva, to wherever it was. We should perhaps look at these smaller Jewish communities in the United States, or even larger ones, it doesn't matter. Synagogues that are having trouble keeping up their memberships, synagogues that can't maintain their Hebrew schools, Jewish day schools that are going bankrupt, and see whether we can send people on shlichut from here to help them and work with them for a year or two after the army, you know, and inspire kids wanting to be part of Bnei Akiva, wanting to be part of Tzofim, wanting to be part of, you know, the Scouts, the movements in Israel, and develop that connection both from the perspective with young people going there, and also curriculum development, helping them to develop the kind of curriculum that's both inspiring and interesting, educational, and worthwhile. Yes, ma'am?
Hi. Caroline, I want to ask you something. It seems to me, with American Jews and also the Jews in Europe and the UK, it's not necessarily that they don't feel Jewish. What they do feel is alienated from Israel, which, being an Olah Hadashah, I find even more scary. They actually say things like, well, we do feel Jewish, we do Shabbat, or we do this, or we do that. They may not be Orthodox, but they do feel Jewish. But they feel that Israel, if only would sit down and shut up, then life would be a lot easier, and they would be accepted as nice, God-fearing Jewish people. But Israel keeps getting in their way, because whether it's the settlements or whether it's this...
Right, I mean, so I think that you're right, and I think that goes back to the question of Zionist education. Right? I mean, they're not getting Zionist education, they're getting peace process education, they're getting education into the two-state solution. And the fact that Israelis are rejecting the two-state solution means that Israelis are bad, and they should, you know, it's reasonable for their governments to punish Israel for that. Plus, you know, Israel itself is becoming so unpopular in the left, and in England and in Europe and in the United States, that, you know, they don't feel like riling all of their friends, you know, by saying that they support Israel, which is why, you know, I think that it's important really to be working on the community level. Everybody's paying attention to the tip of the iceberg, right? The tip of the iceberg in the United States in particular is at the university level. Why is it the tip of the iceberg? Because it's what we see on top of the water level, right? But the iceberg beneath it is the crumbling communities that are sending these kids to the university essentially naked, right? They're unarmed, you know, ignorant. And so then everybody's pouring resources into university programs, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, although I think they're the wrong programs. That's something completely different. But I mean, you know, they're pouring money into the universities, but the place where you blunt that battle is in first and second grade. You know, the way that you fight in the universities is by teaching 8-year-olds, right, what Lag BaOmer is really, you know, what Yom Ha'atzmaut is really, you know, and unapologetically in the privacy of your own community. Right? That's where you make the difference. That's where you preserve the identity. You preserve the identity there, because the student who goes to college at 18 or 19 or whatever, who knows that, who's been in an environment where he has been given an unapologetic, truthful history of who he is as a Jew, is a student who's not going to be daunted by that, and is not going to be intimidated by that. I mean, maybe he will, because people shy away from controversy, but they're not going to be swayed by it, because they're going to be coming, they're already knowing, and then you're not going to have that much of it. But then, you know, you get into the synagogue crisis, right? The synagogue crisis. So here in Jerusalem, you have, you know, the rabbinical colleges or whatever of JTS and of the Reform thing, and what is it called? The rabbinic, Hebrew Union, right? Hebrew Union. You know, I mean, I've seen in the United States the young rabbis that are being churned out by these places. They're not pro-Israel. And then they're going to have, you know, 40-year commitments to synagogues in the United States where, you know, their big communal action is calling for a communal Shiva after Donald Trump wins the election on November 7th. You know, which is just a shanda on so many different levels, right? What is Shiva, right? And what are you doing? But you know, the point is that these institutions that are operating here in Jerusalem, right, also have to be influenced by the communities here in Jerusalem, right? What are you teaching your rabbinical students? What are they learning? Why is it that they're quoting Peter Beinart when they get out of JTS? Literally, they are. Why? Daniel Gordis wrote an article about it several years ago that really, turned on the light for me, that informed me of this. But then I started seeing it in all of these communities in the United States that he was right. Well, this is something that has to be changed. And, being here in Jerusalem, around the corner from these schools, means that, we also have a responsibility to engage these schools, that they're not just happening to be here, but they are here, and they're learning from us here. And the students who are going to those schools are not coming out as conservative and reformed rabbis who think that, sitting Shiva after Hillary Clinton wins is an appropriate action for a spiritual community. Loses, sorry, yes.
How do we encourage Zionism, to rebirth of Zionism in our Orthodox communities, both here and in the United States, that do not feel so Zionist?
Well, that I think is not the main problem. Why is it not the main problem? Because the problem that I'm addressing here is not even so much their divorce from Israel. What I'm concerned about is their overall divorce from everything. Their removal of themselves from the chain, of Jewish history. That's what I'm most concerned about. So if this Orthodox synagogue or that Orthodox synagogue is less Zionist than we'd like them to be, that's a completely different issue. Because what I'm talking about is a community in crisis, a community that's facing, that's staring at annihilation in the face and shrugging its shoulders. That's the difference. Yes?
Without defeatism, I've noticed in the few years I've been here, the American communities have per capita the lowest Aliyah rate in the world. Mm-hmm. Things have been good in America. Things are not so good in America anymore, as you put before.
I'll repeat the question.
What concern we face?
Look, I think he said
American Aliyah to Israel.
Right. So he asked me what can cause American Aliyah to Israel, and I think that you hit on something here too, because I believe that one of the things that can save American Jewry is Aliyah from America. Why? Because I even see it in my own family, right? I'm the only member of my generation, my family, who lives in Israel. I've made Aliyah by myself, and everybody else is in the United States, third generation American Jew. And I see the impact that having Aunt Caroline in Israel has had on my nieces and nephews in terms of inspiring them to remain Jews. And I don't mean it because Aunt Caroline is famous. I mean because they have family in Israel. It's got nothing to do with what the relative in Israel does. It's that you have somebody who means somebody, who is your blood, who who's in Israel. So I also believe that, that part of this outreach that Israel needs to do towards the American Jewish community has to be aggressive Aliyah promotion. I think that it's essential for them to make Aliyah in large numbers. I think that the way to save, say, 4 million American Jews and make sure that they become 5 million American Jews again, in 50 years or whatever, is for 500,000 American Jews to make Aliyah, or at least 250,000 in the beginning. And I think that the Israeli government itself has failed here, right? We have been cowed by the American Jewish leadership into not aggressively promoting Aliyah in the United States. In a way, birthright was supposed to be anti-Aliyah, right? It was supposed to say, okay, you come here, You get an all-expenses-paid trip for 10 days to Israel because you're Jewish, and that's it. Now go live. You know, no follow-on, no saying, okay, this is an opening to Aliyah. You know, no promotion of Aliyah to the American Jews while they're here, you know, when they get back, and that, you know, is something that should change. And I know actually that some really good work has been done by Birthright in the United States to try to maintain the contact and the involvement of the young people who come here on that program, and that has to be empowered and strengthened, and I think that's really important too. But yes, Aliyah promotion is a serious part, because the minute that people have a tangible link in the form of a relative in Israel, something that the vast, overwhelming majority of American Jews do not have, the minute that they do have that, then their whole perception on their Judaism changes. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
As somebody who worked in Jewish education at one point in my life in the U.S., one of the things that I'm hearing you say, and something that I used to say, is that the synagogue schools, the Hebrew schools, have fallen down the slippery slope to such an extent, such that you would have synagogue schools that once upon a time had Hebrew school for 6 hours a week, but the shul down the street only had 3 hours a week, and they were all in competition for the same potential membership. And what you have today are very few places around the U.S., certainly on the East Coast, which I know the best, where Hebrew school is 6 hours a week. Parents don't have time.
Well, plus there's soccer.
After-school activities. And unless you're going to really educate the kids, separate from day school for a minute.
No, I know. Look, I get it. And the thing is that, you know, here I think that we have to take a lesson from Chabad, right? I mean, Chabad is the fastest growing institution in the United States, which I think is fantastic. But I mean, you know, what Chabad does is the exact opposite. Instead of saying, okay, they got 3 hours, we'll give you 2. But they're giving me 2, I'm giving you 90 minutes. And you can still have a bar mitzvah, and it'll all be fantastic, right? So Chabad is saying, look, this is what we got. This is our product. We're standing by it. You know, everybody is welcome. And again, you know, it's the difference between catering to the lowest common denominator and asking people to rise to the occasion. And I think that the chance, and the funny thing is that if you take 2 secular Jews in New York, right, and one it has an involvement in Chabad, and the other one has an involvement in, you know, a Reform temple, the likelihood that they'll both remain by and large secular until the day they die is very high. The likelihood that the one at Reform synagogue is going to marry a Jew is very low, and the likelihood that the one who's going to a Chabad house is going to marry a Jew is very high. So, you know, this is something that works, and this is something that should be, again, you have to look at what works, and what works is challenging people. What works is not saying you don't have to do anything and you can still be a member.
I've got to take issue with you on that. Again, as someone who worked in the New England area running Hebrew schools, among other things, the fact that Chabad exists and it's free and people can't afford the synagogue dues.
So you're saying it's because it's free?
I'm saying that it's a sacrilegious thing to say for you to hear this. But in fact, it undermines the existing Jewish education in many communities.
Well, so no, but I think that then, and I don't want to get into just a conversation between me and you, although I find it personally interesting. But the one thing that I can say is that, okay, well, what's in Chabad's model then? Free. Free is good, you know, and to the extent that dues for synagogues are too expensive, people aren't going to join them. So, I mean, you know, you have to also, you can say they're pricing everybody out. It's like, you know, the argument against Yisrael Hayom, but they're free. Oy vey, they're free. That's fantastic that they're free. You know what?
Everyone welcome. They make
everybody feel welcome. And they don't say, "Where's your ticket for Rosh Hashanah?" Oh, I'm sorry, there's no place for you here. You know, they don't do that. So, you know, I personally say, instead of saying, how dare they do that, I say, let's figure out a way for us to do that. You know, let's get everybody to do that, you know. Anyway, I have one last question, because the gentleman in the front row has been asking me, please call in. So here you go.
Just very quickly, I think that even problem to the one face
Say that again, I'm sorry.
that you described is the enemy within. The
Yes.
joint list can stand in the Knesset and talk terribly about our state. We have the Isaac Herzogs, the Libni, the Shalom Achshav, the breaking the silence. All these forces from within that are deteriorating the country.
בוודאי. והם יוצאים כל יום. Look, I mean, Israel, like I said, you know, we've got some bugs we've got to work at, and we've got some features we've got to work at, right? I mean, we are not, we have a lot of problems. You can read my article in Friday's Jerusalem Post that I'm writing now, or in Ma'ariv if you prefer. I'm going through a couple of them. But you know, I mean, every week there's something else to talk about. But you know what? You're right. We've always had difficulty, because we're a people with lots of different ideas about things, and we're an open people, and we're open to ideas, and we're open to discourse, and may the best man win. And I agree, you know, what do we do when Isaac Herzog is saying, oh, you know, the British Labour Party is just fantastic, you know, yeah, Corbyn's a problem, but 100 members of Parliament showed up at the last Labour Friends of Israel dinner, and therefore we have nothing to worry about. You know, this is absurd. It's crazy, it's wrong, and it's wrong-headed to make these kinds of statements. And people in positions of power are making them. But you know, all you have to do is say, that's his opinion. I disagree with it. You know, and here's why. And here's what's wrong with what they're saying. Or, you know, there's another option, is you don't have to highlight it. You know, I mean, one of the things that these organizations do that's so devastating for the American Jewish community, not to mention for Israel, but for the American Jewish community, is what they're doing is they're saying, it's great, it's fine. In fact, the moral thing to do is to abandon Israel. The moral thing to do is to go with the people who are telling you that you have no right to freedom. And so they're, at a very fundamental level, playing to the lowest common denominator, right? I mean, they're saying, just leave. You know, just forget it. You guys are the bad guys. You know, you're like the Germans. You're terrible. You're a bunch of Nazis. Yuck. Right? Stay away. God forbid, right? But that's what they're saying. They're saying, we're coming to you from Israel, and we're telling you that Israel is terrible. So these people listen to it. Now, why do they listen to it? Well, sometimes they listen to it because they're weak. They don't feel like fighting, and they don't feel like dealing with it anymore. And they're saying, look, I heard this guy from Breaking the Silence. He said the IDF is a bunch of, you know, war criminals, and forget it, you know. Or it's because they don't know any better, because they learned it from their synagogue, where their rabbi is an idiot and been telling them lies, because that's what he learned when he was getting smicha at some ridiculous yeshiva somewhere or another on the Upper West Side of New York. You know, I mean, this is what's going on, and this is why, you know, it's important for us to go to the people and light them up and inspire them and give them something to believe in, because they, you know, birthright is about doing that, right? It's about giving people their birthright. It's an extraordinary privilege, an honor to be a Jew, and it's denying somebody, it's theft of biblical proportions, truly, to not allow Jewish children to learn that about themselves. And, you know, we just got to do it. So anyway, those are my thoughts. And I'm sticking to them. Thank you.